right, welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I'm Aaron Brightman. Knights of the Raritan. This episode is brought to you by the Rutgers NIL Collective. Click on the link for the free newsletter in the description of this episode to find out more about their goings-ons within the organization. All the exclusive event invites they're going to be having going on during the season, and also Rutgers updates they'll provide through this free newsletter. And as always, to find out how to become a member to support Rutgers student athletes with NIL. Happy to have back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast, Larry Krayn, to talk some Rutgers football here. Just a little bit about 2 weeks out from the season opener. Larry, thanks so much for being back.
Thanks for having me, my brother. And I am a NIL subscriber as well, so I like the little promo going on in the beginning of the show here.
Yes, got to pump up Knights of the Raritan, and obviously great time of year for Rutgers fans to get re-engaged in that. And obviously a highly anticipated 2024 season coming up for Rutgers football. Wanted to do something a little bit different here as we preview the season ahead. We're going to do a little bit of a theme here, talking about Rutgers football. We're going to talk about the offense, the defense, individual players, as well as the overall team outlook, with the theme of what we think will happen, what we think won't happen, and what we think could happen. So let's start there with the offense. Obviously, quarterback is a huge conversation. I'll start with the will happen. I do believe that Rutgers will be more efficient in the passing game, and that will lead to averaging over 150 yards per passing per game, which, believe it or not, is not a Guinness World Book of Records by any stretch of the imagination. But Rutgers hasn't done that since 2015 with Chris Laviano. I looked it up recently for something else. He threw for over 2,200 yards that year. Vedral threw for 1,800 yards one season. Wimsatt threw for 1,700, but no one's come over that 150 average since. I think it will finally happen this year. Larry, thoughts there?
I think it's just interesting, number one, how when you think about quarterbacks like Chris Laviano and, people, Rutgers fans, during some of those seasons, you might be a little underwhelmed because maybe Gary Nova just left and you're like, what do we have? Is Rettig the guy? But then in hindsight, Laviano had, again, not a Guinness Book of World Records type stat, but we were lucky to have it compared to what we've had the last several years. And I think with Ethan Kaliakmanis this year, I like your number. When you said the number, I had the same reaction you did live, which was it's not going to break any records, but it's a substantial step up from what we've seen. It's going to add a totally different dynamic to our offensive output. And I think Ethan Kaliakmanis, he may not set the world on fire, and that's not a knock on him. I think he's going to be substantially better throwing the football than we've seen in recent years, but it's going to be productive. And I saw Greg Schiano recently say in an interview, we need to get the ball in the hands of our talented receivers. And whether you put the ball in their hands 7 yards out and they run for 70 yards, or whether you put the ball in their hands after a 70-yard route, it's the same result. Get the ball in the hands of these playmakers. I think you're going to see Kaliakmanis make these plays. We may not set the world on fire every game, Aaron, but it's going to be a big step up from last year. What I think, I want to stay in that passing game. What I think will happen, I think you're going to see Dymere Miller emerge as the number one receiver on this team. He, came up from Monmouth. He's got a lot of potential. The Big Ten Network guys were saying he looked like the best receiver from the small sample size they saw. There's been a lot of fanfare. The room's talented, okay? And there's a lot of guys that could emerge. There's a lot of guys that are coming back, guys that, Brantley are going to play for, the first time. But I like what I've seen from him, what I've heard about from him. And I think he's going to make a big impact. He might be our leading receiver.
Yeah, great point there. Totally agree on Miller. The ceiling is really high. But with all that being said about the pass game, the thing I think will not happen is they will not go away from their identity. This is still going to be a run-heavy offense. I'm thinking like 65%, maybe 60, a little bit, depending on the matchups. But overall, we know that at the end of the day, Rutgers' strategy is to just, ground teams with the run game in that fourth quarter, wear them down and let Manungai do his thing and just, will this team to victory with defenses know what's coming, 8-man boxes, and they can't stop it. I just think that will continue to be the identity this year. And what do you think in terms of the run game and what Rutgers offers there?
I'll piggyback off that in two ways, really. I think I'm going to say that Rutgers is not going to drop out of the top third in rushing offense or, attempts per game. And they're not going to, the passing game is as improved as it's going to get, will not be in the top half of the Big Ten by most metrics, right? You're not going to see the most yards per game in the top half. You're not going to see maybe passing touchdowns per game. You're not going to see those things. Certain games may be outliers, but I think in keeping lockstep with what you said, I think we are going to maintain that identity. I think we were plus 60% last year in rushing versus passing attempts. I don't see that changing. What I do think will change is some of those rushing attempts, as opposed to being a quarterback scramble or a design quarterback run, they're going to be more well placed in the hands of the backs. And we're going to see more, well constructed passing plays for that 40%, 45% we do select to pass. I think you're going to see it, more in the hands of the quarterback, more designed, precision passing plays. So the offense is going to look a little different in terms of style and specific plays, maybe more to the tight end. You got the new tight end there. But I think overall, I agree with you. Our identity is not going to change. You're not going to set the world on fire throwing the ball, and you're not going to see us go too far away from the rushing attack.
Yeah, that's really a big reason for optimism is that if Rutgers can just be competent in the short passing game, the ceiling for this season goes up dramatically compared to last season's team.
Yes. And you know what? I think it was interesting when we watched I know you can't gauge a ton from the spring game, and you're not supposed to. But I thought it was telling, early on when you have Ethan, connect on a deep ball, and we couldn't even connect on a simple screen the first pass of the game. And it's like, as much as I was kind of rooting for a quarterback battle to go more down to the wire, I think it's a big difference when you can complete screen passes on a consistent basis. And it's no knock against anybody else, but I think when a kid like Ethan can just do that on a consistent basis with this offense, with Kirk Shiraka's offense, I just think it's going to bring out the best in what he wants to do in those playmakers, in his play design. And those little efficient passing plays are going to go a long way for this team, especially because I think, Aaron, Schiano likes to minimize risk. He likes to play ball control. And one of the ways you do that is with running plays. One of the ways you do that is with the short passing game and high completion percentage passes that can break out for longer plays and impactful plays, even if it's 4 or 5 yards. It just varies up what the defense has to watch out for. So I think we'll see more of that, and it'll be efficient.
Yeah, great points. I definitely think yards after catch will go up this year. And that was what was so maddening last year was that they couldn't complete the short yardage passes, but they gave up on it too at some point and just really didn't even try, which, really hurt. So I agree. Having that facet of the passing game and the offense will help. And due to that, it's not a negative, but I just think it's also kind of a compliment to the offensive line from last year. I think you could see the Rutgers offensive line give up more sacks than they did last year, simply because they basically gave up none last year. It was like right at round 1 a game. And the fact that I think that Rutgers will be a little bit more willing to throw in third down passing situations this year. Last year it was 3rd and 9. I mean, they still were handing it off to Monungai, where I think they could be a little bit more unpredictable this year. So not a negative. I think they'll still be competent. I expect, with the stability of the offensive line, Schiano saying earlier this week that, it's pretty much set, which is good news. And seems like there is certainly some continuity building with that group. You would think that there's a step forward happening, but even so, that you could still see, because of such a low sack rate last year, that more could happen this year. Not necessarily a problem, just the reality of the change of the offense in a positive way. Thoughts there?
Yes, I think I agree with you there. I think we're going to see a big change in the offense. You're going to have more of that drop back pocket passing, and you're going to have, especially the right side of that line. We don't really know for sure. Schiano seems more confident than I've seen him in years with respect to he thinks he knows who his 5 guys are, but you need depth, and the difference in the offensive playbook and the strategy may well result in more sacks. I think what you could see, and I think some people might get a little like, why are you saying could? Why aren't you saying definite? I think you could see Kyle Monungai, in the top 3, top 5 rushers in the Big Ten this year, but I don't. The reason I say could is because, I think you have a point with this where the running back room is kind of deep, and we saw some guys start to emerge last year. But I think he's still got a lot of potential. he's still going to get the rock and he's going to get a chance to carry it. But a lot comes down to the offensive line, comes down to how we spread the ball around, both in the passing game and with the running back core. But I think you could see him emerge as one of those top backs again. And I think he'll be a top back regardless by some metric, right? He's going to be our leading back, I think. I think he's going to, his yards per carry are going to be what they're going to be. They're probably near the upper half of the league. But in terms of raw yards, I think he could be in that top 5. But a lot's going to depend on the other guys in the league and also how we spread the ball around. And I think there's something to be said for that. And I think we had talked a little bit, and you had mentioned some of the reasons for that possibility of the change with Monangai too.
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head, and as you were discussing it, is regardless of whether he is in that top 3 or 5 total yards, I totally agree in that. I think his yards per carry will go up. He'll be more efficient. Having less of a load to have to carry per se, we think. A, because of the shift in the offense, but also B, having Sam Brown back healthy, we think he'll play a bigger role. So it's all positive, where it might just make him even that much more effective and deadly down the stretch of games. I think he is the kind of back that, gets better with more carries as he goes. But if he's, a lot fresher going into the fourth quarter than he's been in last year, that can only be a benefit.
And I want to ask you, with respect to Sam Brown, curious as to your thoughts. I mean, we saw him burst onto the scene 2 years ago to the point where we switched offensive coordinators and the plan looked like, hey, ride the wheels off of this kid and get some traction. He will run through a wall. He had some setbacks with the injuries last year. I wanted to ask you, do you think it was primarily the injury? Do you think it was the emergence of Monangai? What was it that it wasn't like he took a step back last year, but I don't think he realized the potential that we fully thought he would last year. Why do you think he will this year? What do you think the reason was last year? And some of these other young kids, what do you think about them taking the load from Monangai as well? It seemed like a couple guys emerged last year.
Yeah, good point. I think with Brown, honestly, I think it just took time for him to get the rust off, and also, training camp last year. I mean, he was still recovering from that foot injury.
Right.
So, it happened late October the year before. So I really feel like when he crossed that year mark in November, even though the competition was tougher, he started to look more like himself. And I think it was just a matter of time. And healing and just getting your strength back and getting your confidence back, as the mental side of it, coming back off an injury like that takes some time. And I think they had the luxury of Monangai being so effective, they didn't have to rush him back. And I think they maybe thought they were going to have to, and then they kind of eased off when they saw how effective Monangai was being, and gave Brown some time to really kind of get his body back, get his legs underneath him. And I think we saw some flashes of him at the end of the year that gave some optimism that, he is getting back into form. And that's why I think, with a whole nother off season now, weight training, spring camp, now training camp, I expect him to look a lot more like that Sam Brown against Ohio State 2 years ago, when he had like 75 yards in the first half and looked like a legit Big Ten back. So yeah, I think if we can get that, plus Monangai, they're going to be that much more unpredictable, and just a two-headed monster is not what the Big Ten is hoping for. That you could say that.
And I'll say this too, you just sparked it in my mind here. While we are still on the offense, I think we will see the most dynamic and deep offensive team we've seen since 2014 this year. I think just you bringing up the depth at the running back position, then you look at the wide receiver room. You have Ian Strong coming back after emerging in a young freshman season with potential. Chris Long coming back off injury. I know there was some speculation as to where he was, but I read recently he's in the mix competing. Brantley coming back, obviously, after being sidelined by NCAA things. I think you're going to see, especially with that quarterback position, if the line can hold up in those skill positions, one of the most deep and dynamic offensive teams we've seen in some time. Whether that manifest itself in the ways we think it could with potential remains to be seen, but I'm genuinely and objectively excited about the talent in that room. How far it will take us remains to be seen. And the trenches, everything starts in the trenches. So that O-line, especially that right side, is going to go a long way in determining that. But I'm excited about the depth, in the backfield and on the edge.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think the fact that it's year 2 of Kirk Shiraka's system, it's year 2 with Shiraka and Flaherty and Brock. I think that kind of continuity too will really help when you have so many returning guys. Obviously, you have Cali Manis that's new, but overall, I think their ability to kind of hit the ground running, pun intended, a little bit, better transition to the start of the year. Plus, the schedule is pretty friendly. Last year they did play Northwestern in the opener. You have two pretty much the most winnable games you have to start the year. So you get a lot of guys involved. And just to go back to your last question was, yeah, I think Jashawn Benjamin, they seem to be really high on him. I think he's the guy that in the short pass game could be really effective.
Very
Get that
true.
open space. He's a real speedy back. So I think he's the natural pick for the third back. And I think it's a matter of how effective Brown will be determining how much Benjamin really gets. But I think he'd be great in terms of short yardage and in terms of, just kind of dumping off in the backfield and letting him fly. I think he's got a lot of potential in that way.
Yeah, he's exciting in that way. And I think I think it's going to keep defenses on their toes because of the dynamic. And when I say dynamic, doesn't mean every player is a world beater, but what it means is every player on that depth chart brings a different dynamic to the field. And you're going to have to account for all those guys, especially if Cali Manis has a good mastery of the offense and is able to sling it around, whether it's 2-yard passes or 20-yard passes. These guys have different skill sets that defenses are going to have to watch out for. Benjamin's another one I'm looking forward to seeing.
Totally agree. All right, shifting to defense now. Obviously, high hopes for a unit that was top 20 nationally in yardage last year. Showed some real signs of progress from the year before. Some dominant play from guys like Mo Toure, Tyrene Powell, Flip Dixon. Aaron Lewis is back as well. 8 starters back overall. Some real depth there in the secondary in terms of frontline talent. Overall, my kind of will be they will continue to be an elite run defense. And I really think this is the year that they showed flashes last year, but with 18 teams in the Big Ten, I think they're going to be able to be considered one of the top 6 Big Ten defenses this year. Obviously, the schedule, I think, is conducive to that as well. But just your hopes and thoughts and anything in terms of what you think this defense can accomplish this year.
Well, I'm looking forward to the dark side, music and mantra as they come out. I think what we saw last year, especially, was Harris Simiak comes in before that, and you see the personality and the swag start to develop on that team, and then you get that identity. Last year, that real personality, that dark side defense. They were feeling themselves. They were feeling that personality. You were seeing the camaraderie when they're interacting with each other. You see Lewis and you see Longer Beam, and they're talking and they're on these interviews. I saw him on Big Ten Network the other day, and you see this like personality emerging. And this Shiano's talked a lot throughout the entire team about, it's a player-led team now. And I think a lot of that derives from that defensive unit and that personality. So I'm excited about them in a lot of ways. I think I completely agree with you. They will be in the top 3rd, 4th, of the league this year. They really made it a point to shut down teams yardage-wise last year. They grew by leaps and bounds. If we're going to could happens, I think they could have substantially more sacks this year than last year. I think last year they got pressure and they did their job a lot of times in the run game, and they set the edge, better, as good as you might want them to do in several of the games. But getting home and getting those sack numbers up, especially for a highly touted, unit of ends and edge rushers like we have that you expect a lot from, I think they take it personally, knowing their personalities and how they see themselves. I think getting home and upping those sack numbers is a big deal. And I think we could see a substantial rise in the sack numbers. But I agree with you that we will see them as a top defense in the Big Ten. I'm astounded that we got so many guys to stay who could have gone to the league, who could have tested the water, who had more than enough talent, more than enough of a resume to go and do that. And these are key players. This is Dixon. This is guys, Powell. I know he's got the injuries, and we'll talk about that in a second because I got another won't. But these guys chose to come back, and they're extremely talented. And I think even with Melton leaving, the cornerback group is going to be good. And so I'm excited about it. I think there'll be a top defense for sure. And I think you're going to see more of those sacks. And I think it'll help us because we're a momentum-based team. We're a chop-the-moment team. And when you could create those moments, We see it with block punts. We see it with other plays. When you can create those pivotal moments in a game, it swings momentum. It changes the dynamic. Get more sacks. It's going to lead to more victories. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, that's a great point about the sacks, and certainly a point of focus. Shiano talking in the offseason about the defensive line needing to get more pressure just with that front four on a consistent basis. And, I think one thing that people maybe forget about or didn't realize was that Wesley Bailey played most of last season injured. And we've
Yes.
seen what he can do when he's at top speed and how he can fly off the edge. And I think he's a guy that, you could see a real upgrade this year, just like for like in terms of his performance on the field because he's healthy. So if he could stay healthy, I think his upside as the edge rusher, I kind of think he could lead the team in sacks off of your point. So I think that's something that, you could certainly see. And I think my won't is a positive is that I don't think you're going to see this defense get worn down like they have in years past, either when the offense was really inefficient, got, 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out. But also, like last November, I mean, they went through that gauntlet of a schedule and the offense couldn't do anything. And the defense just got obliterated because, that Iowa game was a perfect example. Obviously, Ohio State before that, super physical game. But Iowa, they just ran out of gas and they were just beat up. And I think that's something that they can avoid this year, partly because of the schedule in November, but also I think if the offense can be what we think it can be, this defense is going to be more fresh and be able to be more effective on a consistent basis throughout the season.
Yeah, and I think, when you look at last year and you look at the several years preceding that, all the way back to, Drew Meringer and Chris Ash, and
oh boy,
I think there's an allure in the modern game, and I think it subsided a little bit in the last couple of years, but there was this allure to this spread offense and this obsession with how quick can we get plays off. And I always thought that if you're a team, like in the pros, the Miami Dolphins or a Shanahan team or something, and it benefits you to get plays off every 2 seconds or under 3 seconds to keep defenses on their heels, fine. Or if the game situation dictates that. But if you're forcing it just for the sake of doing it, I think it can have a really bad effect on your defense. And I think Rutgers, even in Shiano's first couple of years here, when they were trying to run this fast-paced offense, it's great if it works. And if it doesn't work, you're 3 and out very quickly and your defense gets gassed. And for a head coach that prides himself on ball control and a stout defense, I thought we saw last year him really transition with Kirk Shiraka into this ball control offense, which was able to possess it longer to give the defense a breath. I think where the limitations were last year, which you just alluded to, were it works against certain teams, especially where the front seven isn't as stout. Our offensive line was playing, pretty darn well in some games, and our running back was just putting the world on his shoulders. Look at Ohio State, right? But when you're playing a team like Iowa, who has a terrible offense last year, but they're stout in the front, and they say, you know what? I know what you're going to do. You don't have to run, a play every 2 seconds, but even if you try to have a ball control offense and run your extremely talented back up that middle, we are going to sell out to stop him. And we are stout and we are able to do it. And we don't even have to sell out as much as you think because we have such stout guys in the front seven. We can stop him. And we're going to dare you to beat us with your skill players on the outside and throw the ball effectively. We couldn't do it last year. There's several reasons why. They don't need to be reiterated. But if this year we can do those things, I think it's going to be much easier on the defense, much easier for them. And I think they're going to have a much better time because of that rest. That was a long-winded way of getting my other points across. But to just piggyback on your point, I agree. I think what we won't see, Aaron, it's not a big deal, but I don't think we're going to see Tyreen Powell back before the Virginia Tech game. I know there's a lot of hype and hoopla that he's coming back and be ready for the season. I think he's doing everything he can to get back for that opener. I think they'd love it, but why are you going to play him those first 2 games? Why not get these kids Walker and the other kids reps? Sit him till VTech. I don't think we're going to see him to open up Labor Day weekend. That's my won't. I don't think it's a big deal, though.
Yeah, no, that's a great one and great points before that. But that makes a lot of sense. I mean, people forget he tore his ACL in January. So that's, we're just reaching that 8-month window, which, is possible. But like you said, there's no reason to rush it. I think that is a luxury of the schedule this year, which kind of leads into my good point is that I think this defense could actually have more depth at the end of this season, partly because of injuries. But also because of the way that schedule is front loaded, I think it's going to be exciting to see some of these younger guys get opportunities. You have such a veteran defense, and it makes sense not to see Powell, like you said, but even other guys. I mean, we don't need Aaron Lewis and Mo Toure, hopefully, against Akron in that fourth quarter. You never know. Mac is no joke. You got to love them action. But at the same
Yes.
point, you have to hope that they can take care of business. And you see that, the backups and that third string, those younger guys get an opportunity. I think linebacker, you touched on it in terms of Powell being out, but Moses Walker, obviously, we all have high hopes for him. But Jabome, he showed a little bit last year, obviously struggled in pass coverage some, but he's a super freak athlete and someone that could really benefit from getting more reps early on in the season. You also have Abram Wright there, really high on Bo Mascow in the secondary. So, in terms of the defensive line, I mean, ultimately they want to get to that 8 or 10 man deep rotation along that line. So who can step up there? Obviously, Malcolm Ray is a guy that we have high hopes for coming from Florida State. But even like a guy like Jordan Thompson, that's just been solid throughout his career. You can see him getting more reps this year. So I think overall, you could end up seeing the depth of this defense, even though there's some big names back. You could see it more well-rounded with guys getting more rotating, which can also go to that other point of not getting as worn down this year. So, yeah, to your point about Powell, I agree. And, who knows who else in that defense could be held out precautionary, guys that he mentioned Mo Toure still recovering, although it sounds like it's no big deal. But, the wear and tear at training camp to prepare for the season, people that say, oh, you got to take it easy. I mean, they're being smart, holding guys out of scrimmage. But, when you have the pads on during the week, you got to go. That's the only way you're going to be prepared. You can't just turn it on and turn it off. So, to your point, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it gives an opportunity for younger guys and for this defense to build depth that will help them down the road in November and beyond.
Yeah, guys like the guys you mentioned, Ray Thompson. I mean, at the end of the day, college football, the beauty of it, part of the beauty of it to me is every year somebody new emerges who you kind of knew, you remember when he was recruited or you don't. You remember when he transferred in or maybe and all of a sudden he emerges and you start seeing that name and you start seeing that jersey number and he becomes a force. And you mentioned Bailey before, and it's like, I remember when he first started making waves on the field, and you're like, wow, he's an electric athlete. And I noticed he was injured and nicked up last year, and you didn't see that same oomph. And you did somewhat, but he was nicked, and guys emerge. And I'm excited to see who emerges this year because Schiano always talks about a pipeline, and now the pipeline's full. So who's emerging next on that pipeline? I think we'll start to see some of those guys. And if you have a fresh rotation along the front on defense, it's always going to bode well for you. It's going to bode well for my point and prediction about sacks. It's going to bode well in the run, defensive game. It's a key, I think, to having the type of defense that Schiano and Harris Simiak want. So I hope we see that this year. And I think we will.
Great points there. So let's move on to individual players in terms of kind of going off of a point you previous made, talking about Demir Miller. I do think this will be the deepest receiving core that Rutgers has since being in the Big Ten, 10 years in now. You mentioned Miller. He's got high ceiling in terms of what he could do. Can he be that explosive playmaker? Maybe a la Leonte Carew, the way Rutgers hasn't had anyone near close to him since. If he could play a little bit of Carew role, that would be certainly big. But I think coupling with Miller, if you can have Ian Strong really emerge as that true number 2 threat, and having both these guys that can make plays deep, that can, make plays yards after the catch in space, and be big play receivers, and have them on both sides of the field, I think that would just, do wonders for the offense. And I think Ian Strong, we saw the flashes last year. We saw the physical abilities, was inconsistent at times, didn't get a ton of snaps in certain games. And I think maybe that was just a natural part of knowing they weren't going to throw it that much. But I think that, and then you mentioned Brantley. He's a veteran guy. I think, whether he starts or not, he's going to play a big role. And then it's a luxury to have Christian Dremel, the veteran, who, I mean, it's such a great story as a walk-on. In terms of the slot, if you have deep threats now, I mean, that middle of the field is going to potentially open up even more for him.
Yes.
And I think he could be even more productive than last year. Maybe he won't lead them in yards, or hopefully he doesn't leave them in receiving yards, but he could lead them in catches again. So
Yes.
I think it's just the four of them together. And of course, there's other guys that could emerge. I know people are, really excited about Benjamin Black. Fama Toure flashed at times last year. Obviously, you have KJ Duff, 4-star freshman. So there's a lot of potential there with this group, and I think it's deep, and I think it's going to be the most explosive wide receiving core that we've had since being in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that. I'm wondering who's going to emerge. I think Dremel, if he's in that position of getting the most catches and he's playing that Wayne Corbett type role, I think you're in a good place because he's your possession guy. You rely on him for a kid like Callie McManus. If he could find him in traffic to move the sticks, that bodes well for you, especially if your big play guys are elsewhere. Let me throw a name out to you in terms of the passing game, not necessarily wideouts. Kenny Fletcher. I'm curious. I know that we haven't seen a lot of tight end action in the last couple of years, but I've heard nothing but good things about him after he switches positions. I'm excited to see what type of impact he can possibly make in that passing game. He played receiver in high school. It's not like he's completely far into it. He's put on some weight. He could be a force blocking, but also catching. If that's another wrinkle, and you've got Dremel as a possession guy who's reliable. You got these playmakers, and I'm curious about Duff, too. I was going to mention that name. All these guys, I still think Chris Long, if he comes back from the injury, I know these guys get a little bit forgotten because they go into injury. We don't hear a lot about them. We don't know what they're doing, but all of a sudden, like, hey, these guys are still on the team. And before his injury, he was a good downfield threat. I'm so curious about who emerges from that 4th, 5th, 6th receiver spot to have big games, and we have such a plethora to choose from. But Fletcher, I'm so curious about what's going to happen with that tight end position. And if he can elevate it for the first time in a number of years, that adds another element to that team, especially when we're talking about ball control, not just running, but in the passing game. He can bring something to that table. I'm excited to see what they do with him.
Kenny Fletcher, Delran Bear. Actually, I've actually never even said this before, but my sister happened to be his guidance counselor in high school. So I know from her that, the kid just, he eats and drinks football. He's super competitive. He's been a great model in terms of a kid that came early, enrolled early, done everything they've asked of him, obviously being willing to change positions. Super great athlete. And like you said, he was a receiver in high school. We saw him make a couple good catches in the spring game as well.
Yeah.
I think for him, if he can bring tenacity as a blocker, he's going to be on the field. And I think he could end up being a nice safety valve for them in terms of Callie McManus developing that rapport. Shiraka has used the tight end at times in other offense. He had his moments last year, and I think, but he was such an effective blocker. If Fletcher wants to really be the true tight end, number one tight end, he's got to be a consistent blocker and be effective. And I think he can be because I was always so excited about his potential as an edge rusher. Now you see him flip. But I think also it just goes into the culture and the mission of the team when you have a guy like that, gave up what his strong suit was, and now he's worked really tirelessly to become the starting tight end. I think it's just a great story and also something that, can motivate the rest of the offense. So I'm with you. I'm super excited about his potential. I don't think, they're going to make him a priority per se, but I think he is a very intriguing option that could be kind of with dump offs, with pressure, and be able to get a few catches per game and really be a factor just in terms of keeping the chains moving and giving Rutgers an outlet that they haven't had in the past.
No, it's true. And I just think piggybacking off what you said about the culture, guys changing positions, being willing to, that also goes to good development. He spends, a couple years on the edge. He knows that position. That's what he's going up against now, blocking as a tight end. And I think you need that complete tight end. We've had a guy like Langan, Johnny Football. He's going out there. He's making some acrobatic catches, but in other ways is not maybe the traditional tight end that you are looking for. You're just finding a way to get one of your football players on the field. And now you have a guy who, yes, he's another one of your football players that you're trying to find a position for to be a contributor, but it's in a position of need. And if he can become more of that complete tight end, I think it's going to, just speak volumes about the way this team functions, the way this culture is, and the way if you can play ball one way or another, this coaching staff will find a place for you on the field to make an impact. We saw it with Langan. We saw it with these guys. You see people like Salam who switch to corner, and they win awards in the spring game. You see these things where guys are willing to switch positions and stick with the culture because of the staff, because of the belief in the system, because of the belief in chop the moment. This is just a new assignment, a new tree to chop at, and they're doing it. And I'm excited to see, how a guy like that adjusts and what kinds of impacts, even if not astronomical, what kinds of impacts he can make.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points there. And, to Langen's credit, he played injured quite a bit as well, and was a warrior for this program. And I think that's a great model for Fletcher. And as Shiano always says, it's a developmental program. So I think Fletcher has the opportunity to kind of be, the poster child for that this season. If he can really solidify himself as a factor, as that number one tight end, it's just going to bode well for the staff too. Like you said, finding a place for football players on the field. It's just going to generate even more selflessness on this team, which is what you need for a team that's hoping to have a special season.
Yes, agreed.
So my won't for players, it's not a negative per se, but I don't think Monangai will lead the Big Ten in rushing. Again, you touched on it before. Excellent point in terms of the competition. Of course, there's a lot of great running backs in the Big Ten, but I really say that with optimism for Sam Brown. I think Sam Brown is going to be much more of a factor this year. They're going to be able to split time a little bit. And I think, as I mentioned before, it's going to, I think, give Monangai an opportunity to be fresher. And we saw what he could do. I think the telling time Monangai was the Miami game, right?
Yes.
You saw him with a month off, being fresh. They have 2 buys this year. If he can split some carries with Brown, him healthier and fresher down the stretch of games is going to be a very dangerous situation for opponents. In a lot of 50-50 games, you want to be able to have Monangai at his best in the fourth quarter. And, of course, part of that is rhythm. 10 carries or 12 or 14 versus 22 going into that fourth quarter. I just think it will allow him to potentially be even more effective and deliver that knockout punch that he's so known for and so good at doing that he showed last year.
No, I agree. And, even it's a numbers game in terms of being nicked up. Yeah, you can be nicked up on one play, but at the end of the day, if you're running constantly and consistently all the time, there's a better chance of putting strain on your muscles. There's a better chance of getting nicked up. There's a better chance of exacerbating, a bump or bruise. And I think at the end of the day, hey, he may thrive on that. That's football. That's the kind of back he is. But just having more of a rotation, keeping him fresh later in the games and later in the season for the things that Rutgers wants to accomplish this year, on the back of somebody to some extent who's their star player, keeping him fresh and not putting him all the workload on him is going to benefit him. Here's a will for you, and this is bold. But I think Ethan Kaliakmanis is going to have his best statistical season so far that he's had. Last year, decent, but struggled. More interceptions than he would have liked. The year before, under Kirk Shiraka, better season, only in the mid-50s completion percentage. I think he'll up that. I think you'll get around in the low 60s from him, and I think you're going to see more yards from him. I don't think you're going to see anything astronomical. I don't think you're going to see Gary Nova's senior season type yards, but I do think you're going to see his best season as a quarterback in this league. He's now an upperclassman. I know he didn't have Shiraka last year, but he had him originally. This is his guy who understands him, who went out and got him in the first place, wanted him in here this year. And I think the talent around him is immense. I think for whatever that's worth, it could be a tick better than his best year 2 years ago. It could be substantially better, but I think he will have his best year as a starter in this league this year. For what it's worth, we'll see how good that is.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's degrees, right? What degree can he be more productive than Wimsatt was last year? And every degree that he can be more productive, the ceiling for this team just goes up, up, and up. So totally agree with you. I think the reunion with Shiraka is going to benefit him. I think it's going to benefit Shiraka in terms of his confidence, in terms of his play calling, and what I think he'll be able to open up the playbook a little bit more too. And as we said, the playmakers with the wide receivers also. So, yeah, absolutely. I think the table is set for Kaliakmanis to have his best season in college football. It's just a matter of what level he can get to, which is obviously going to be a huge factor in determining the ultimate success for this team. My could for players, I think that the safety group could be a top 3 unit in the Big Ten. Obviously, Flip Dixon's back, but Shaquan Loyal, Desmond Igbenusson, the three of them, multi-year starters, a ton of snaps underneath, in their careers, and just playing the roles that they're in. Obviously, Rutgers playing more of a 4-2-5 typically, and they've just flourished in those roles over the years and all been able to make plays at times and been really consistent as well. So I think that is something that you could see emerge. There's a lot of good secondaries and safety groups in the Big Ten, but I really think that those three, if they could be on the field together for the majority of the season, I think they could really take a step forward and elevate this defense in a way that is going to be really important to this team taking a step forward.
Yeah, I think those are, and I know some guys get a lot of fanfare and some guys don't, but I still consider those guys lunch pail guys. That those three, they're bringing it every game. They're laying hits. They're coming up and playing the run, and they're getting into the passing game. And a guy like Shaquan Loyal, who's what is he, a 3-year or 4-year starter by now? 3-year starter. He's the guy who won the Temple game a couple of years ago with that pick six. And I think you've seen growth in him. You've seen some lumps. There's been games where there's been some struggles covering certain things, but he's been in there. He's been a hard hitter. He's been somebody who's able to go up and be a ball hawk when needed. And he's an example, I think, of that whole group. The fact that Flip came back and some of the plays we saw from him and just the energy he brings and the fearlessness he brings to the position. It's a Schiano coach team when the back end of that secondary is playing at that level and they're lunch pail guys who also get fanfare. And I'm excited to see them quite a bit. I think somebody from that safety group could lead the team in interceptions. I think you mentioned that earlier with the possibility of Loyal, but we have some talented corners, but don't sleep on those safeties and what they bring to the defense. I'm excited to see them. So I agree with you there.
Yeah, I have to give you credit. You said Loyal before we went on the air. So, and I said, I agree with you. So
yes.
That was all you. And I think, yeah, absolutely. And his ability, every time he gets a pick, it's all bets are off. I mean, his yards after the interception, even last year, I forget which game it was. Maybe it was Temple as well. He had that big return off the pick. So, yeah, he's a guy that I think is a big playmaker in that back of the defense, as all are three. Anything else in terms of individual players you wanted to mention?
No, I would just say to the listeners, like we do riff quite naturally, and I know you love it, but we do a little pregame. We derive some of our brainstorm from it. So there's your evidence right there. But no, I think we covered a lot of the individual players. I think, there's some good predictions in there. This is why we do it. It's preseason. Who knows what's going to happen? But I think we have a pretty good beat on it, and I think a lot of the fan base does. I mean, I don't think any of this is crazy surprising. Some might be kind of controversial. But I think, this makes a lot of sense going into this year, and I think there are expectations on this team. And they're not just on one or two players. There are expectations on this team as a team that goes to our points about depth, that goes to our points about, spreading the ball around, defense and offense. And I think if this team, both as individuals and with the depth and the dynamics that we see, is able to reach its potential, we could see, a really fun season here as Rutgers fans.
Absolutely. And that gets us to our team projections in terms of will, won't, and could. I think the will, it's nothing fancy, but I think we both agree. We both believe this team will be better this year. They'll be more balanced, and they'll be able to produce the program's first winning regular season in a decade since 2014. That is not a controversial statement whatsoever. And I think it's safe to say, too, it would be a disappointment if that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think you're right, Aaron. I think last year, those familiar with me and my predictions, I predicted the 6-6. Most people did. It wasn't rocket science, okay? But that was a year where getting to 500 with the schedule was, I don't want to say it was the apex, because once you got through the year, there is some merit to the idea that, okay, we started looking better, so the expectations increased. But that was about where you thought that team was in their development. And anything less, I think, would have been a disappointment, and anything else more would have been gravy on it. This is a year where we really should have a winning season, and that's the expectation. If you look at the schedule, you look at the team, you look at last year, we should have a winning season. I believe we will. The extent of how much, how far we are above 500, that, requires some more analysis and requires, I think, seeing how these other teams shape up as the season goes on. But I think anything less would certainly be a disappointment. It's okay this year to say, we expect a winning season and we expect some noise from Rutgers. some significant noise, one whether that's a better bowl game or whatever it is. Everything's lined up for us. You don't have the big three on the schedule. You have other teams that are good, but you don't have the big three on the schedule for the first time in years since you've entered the Big Ten. You have the best team on paper and on the field. If we are going off last year's results, that you've had in years, the expectations are to have a winning season. I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I think that is the expectation. Anything less, I think, would be a disappointment. Barring certain variables, quarterback, God forbid, I don't know, but you should have a winning season.
Yeah, obviously the injury threat and bug is always a concern. And in terms of how deep this team really is, hopefully we don't have to find out by need. And it's
Right.
more of a luxury in terms of working guys in and seeing how this development stage for guys behind the starters has progressed. But totally agree with you there. And I think that leads to my won't, which is not a negative per se, but I think it's been fun with all the hype. I mean, I had Jake Butt on last week just talking about, the national media kind of jumping on the bandwagon and believing that Rutgers could be, it's a trendy sleeper pick. And also, even some national media saying they think they could threaten for a college football playoff berth. That's what I think won't happen this year. It's not a slate on the team. I do think that 4-game stretch of at Virginia Tech, Washington at home on short rest, at Nebraska, and then Wisconsin at home. If you look at those 4 programs, right, you just take a step away. I mean, those 4 programs have been so much more successful than Rutgers over the years. And that doesn't mean Rutgers can't beat them now. Obviously, it matters on the field this year. But I just think if they go 2-2 in that stretch, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. And you'd be, I think, maybe happy is the wrong word, but I think you'd be fun, and it's still a good position as a team. You'd be 4-2 most likely, assuming they take care of business against Howard and Akron. If you get 2-2 through that stretch, you're setting yourself up to really make some noise in that second half of the schedule. But it's not going to be easy. And honestly, on paper, they could win or lose any of those games, and they could go, if disaster strikes, that is going to be a very tough 4-game stretch. So I just think because of that, they're not going to rattle off a 6-0 or 7-1 start that maybe people are dreaming about. That would put them in that college football conversation. But I think they will still have, be changing the perception for a positive. There'll still be plenty of good vibes. But I think it's going to be a good season, not necessarily one in which we're dreaming of the college football playoff.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think sometimes I caution fans, and fans can do whatever they want. It's their business, their fans. We're fans. We do what we want when we're off the air, But last year, I think, with the consistent losses towards the end of the year, people got really more down on everything than they really should have, in my personal opinion, because if you looked at the schedule at the onset, you saw where the wins were coming and you saw where the losses were probably coming, and it wasn't a surprise. And this year, I don't want people to get so caught up in the hype that they see things as a disappointment if it's not this epic playoff conversation team. If we still have a winning year, still get to a really good bowl and still make noise, which I think we'll do, I think you got to take that. And I think the other point is we saw it last year, I think with Iowa primarily, I recall. There's this perception that, well, if you look at them this year, they look terrible on offense. We've been riding high. We're going to go into their house and we're going to beat them. And I'm confident. And it's like what you just said resonates so much with me is we've never beaten these programs. And that doesn't mean I'm a defeatist. And that doesn't mean we're never going to beat them. Like you said, go 2-2 and we could make some noise later in the schedule. I'm not selling them short, and they better not feel that way, and I know they don't. But me as an analyst sitting here on the sideline, you're talking about going to Nebraska. I understand that some Nebraska fans, from what I understand from Big Ten circles, are a little scared that could be their first loss or a loss for them. But that doesn't mean that it's a cakewalk for us or a guaranteed win. Washington lost players, totally understand it, but Wisconsin, every year, but every other year, it looks like we have the chance to beat them, and they always wind up beating us. So I'm not saying that I'm predicting, because I haven't done my prediction video yet, that we're going to lose or win these games. What I'm saying is I agree with you. Having expectations, being substantially better is one thing. Getting to a level where we're in that conversation is another thing. And it could happen in some universe where everything breaks our way. And I am very excited about this team. I think it's the best team we've had in years. But you also have to look at how dynamic is this team in certain positions? Who are we stacked up against? Who else is lurking in the Big Ten? I know our schedule is our schedule, and if we don't quite, what happens at the end of the year if we have to face off against some other team, and how do they make us look? If we have this conversation in November and we got through that gauntlet you just mentioned and we came out 3-1 or 4-0, then we can recalibrate. But as of right now, Rutgers has to go out and do it. And I'm more excited about the incremental step, Aaron, of going from, our last good season was 2014 that we really could celebrate. Last year was a good season, going 500, getting a winning season, beating an old Big East foe in Miami. This incremental step, I'm looking for a decisively winning season. I'm not necessarily caught up in the hype of a playoff conversation, and I'm not expecting that. So I agree with you.
Right. And think about all the great feelings we still have for that 2014 campaign. Yes. And they were 6-5 going into that last week and had that epic comeback against Maryland and then won the whole game, of course. So it wasn't like they were, 8-3 at any point in that season. It was a grind as always. And I think that the reason for optimism too is that in November, you look at that schedule right now and things will change and there'll be a surprise team, but Minnesota is never easy. Illinois is never easy for Rutgers. Maryland, they've gotten trounced the last 3 years. And then at Michigan State is never easy. Even with a, first-year coach, we'll see. You'd rather play them earlier than later. But on paper, I mean, those are 4 games that you could see them run the table on too. So that's my could. I think you could see them run the table in November, regardless of what happens in that 4-game stretch earlier in the season. So it's going to be a fascinating season just in terms of how the flow of the season goes. I think those 2 bye weeks too, having that bye week before the November 4 games is going to be huge. After that road game to USC, gives them a chance to catch their breath, kind of reset, and be able to finish the season strong. So there's a lot of hype about Rutgers having an easy schedule. There is no easy schedule in the Big Ten. Yes. And if you look at the preseason poll in terms of the Big Ten or the Cleveland.com, Rutgers plays like every team from 6 to basically 15. Mm-hmm. So, and they're right in the middle at 9. So there are 2 games on the schedule. You say, all right, they have to win those. USC, in my opinion, on paper, talent-wise, is kind of the closest thing to a most likely loss. And then everything else, you really could roll the die and you could, play the scenarios out 100 times, you probably get 100 different outcomes.
Yes. And I mean, USC, the other thing I just want to say, on paper, closest thing to a loss, we're also going to USC, traveling coasts. So that's the one where you kind of look at and you're like, you're not confident, or I'm not, at the onset, doesn't mean I give up. It's not like a going to Ohio State, even though, it's not one of those like where there's no way, but it's not looking good in that regard. Everything else is a dice roll, like you said. And look, these other teams that are middling teams that were close to this 500 record last year, who have also improved and have dynamic players, they're looking at us and saying we're a roll of the dice. So this is where Rutgers needs to really, I think, as a culture, as a program, needs to make its, I don't know why I'm losing the saying, the phrase, but make its money or whatever. They have to go out and win the games that are toss-up games on a consistent basis. This is the year to do it. They may lose some, and that's fine, but they have to string enough of those toss-up games together to really put a winning season together. There's no better opportunity than this season. You look at that November schedule. I like your could. I agree with your could. I second and double down on your could. You have Minnesota, who kind of seems to be on a little bit of a downswing right now. The coach might be on the hot seat. Maryland scares me because we just have been pummeled by them for a couple of years, but the quarterback's gone. And that was the biggest thing. It seemed like Tagovailoa was just, for whatever reason, went off on us. Our defense didn't respond well to him. They still have some athletes, but, I mean, time for redemption with them. Illinois, and Michigan State, those are 2 road games, 2 home games, but all formidable, but all winnable on paper. To your could. That's the type of stringing together victories that you have to do if you're Rutgers and you want to take the next step. You got to also put some of those demons to bed, Aaron. You got to beat Wisconsin or Nebraska. You got to do it in a year when you're a talented team, you're on an upswing, and they may be vulnerable or at least on the level as you. You got to make those steps, especially with an expanded league. You can't stay under those other middle teams if you want to be an upper tier middle team. You got to beat them. So I think we can, but it's a roll of the dice. I'm actually just really excited for it because this is the first year in a while where I don't have You have a couple sure wins that you hope, and you have USC looks like probably a loss. But other than that, this is the first time in a long time where I don't have 3 clear losses, and then you're trying to see where we can get the possible wins. Like, we could win every game. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be competitive. It's going to be fun for the whole league and us.
Absolutely. It's going to be a blast. And I think just to that point, in terms of everything we've talked about, with the team being more stable, being more balanced with the offense and the defense, building depth, all of that could just set up for the perfect storm heading into November with a very winnable schedule where it can all kind of gel together, and really just finish strong and get to that 8, 9, who knows when mark, and get to that better bowl game. I've always been a fan of the Music City Bowl in Nashville. So I think that, in terms of the Big Ten bowl games, I mean, that and the Citrus Bowl, aside from, you figure 3 teams probably will go to the college football playoff, maybe 4. So you get that 4th or 5th slot, you could slide into one of those 2 games. That would be a major upgrade and probably the best bowl that Rutgers would ever be in.
Yes, and that's what I'm looking for. Like, that is, you could call it incremental, but that's a huge victory. Even like last year, beating Miami in the Pinstripe Bowl, fine, it's the Pinstripe Bowl, but hey, we got the monkey off our back in like this age-old, you can call it a rivalry, but whatever, it's an incremental step forward that starts to establish us as, and I predicted it before that game, we are now a Big Ten team. They are an ACC team. We are going to line up and we are going to beat them in the trenches, and it happened. And incremental steps are fun too when you're a Rutgers fan and when you're building something. And getting to the best bowl game in our history might well be a very acceptable, incremental consolation prize as opposed to getting all the way to the promised land. So I'm excited, and it's all there in front of this team. It's in front of the fans. It's in front of everybody, and everybody should be excited, but everybody should be objective and just get ready for the ups and downs of the season. Let's ride this thing out.
Yeah, great points. And you just reminded me of something in terms of incremental progress. You can't say Miami without saying they've won 4 in a row against ACC opponents, all of which were former Big East foes. Obviously Syracuse, Boston College, Virginia Tech, and Miami. Now you double down, you go at Virginia Tech, one of the toughest places to play, which is really going to be a defining game for both programs that are both trendy sleeper picks. So there's a lot of excitement, a lot of hope. A lot of things that, could go either way, but I think we've both seen a lot of Rutgers football over the years to know that this team does have a chance to make it a really special season. And really appreciate all your time and great insight as always. It's always fun to have you back. We'll have you back again during the season. Any closing thoughts, anything that we didn't say, running an hour long here? Hopefully people are still listening, but anything else you have to say just in terms of your thoughts going into this season?
I'm astounded that people listen to me all the way through, but I know I listen to you all the way through. So I think those of us crazies do exist. So thanks everybody for listening. Make sure you check me out. Aaron's going to be on my channel soon too. Nothing else, man. I mean, it was a pleasure coming on. It's always a pleasure coming on. I'd say be on the lookout for more of our collaborations and collaborations elsewhere in the Rutgers world. No, I'm just very excited for the season. I really appreciate the opportunity. I love when we get together because it just flows, and I think people hopefully enjoy the conversation and the dialogue that we produce when we get together. So it was a pleasure as always, and I'm looking forward to touching base again with you and with all the listeners, as the season progresses. And I'll be there at the games. Come see me in the blue lot. I don't drink as much as I used to, but I'm still fun. Come see me and go RU.
And Larry, tell people where to find you.
Oh, I am Knight Watch. Just type in Knight, like the Scarlet Knight, KN, Knight Watch on YouTube. Just search Knight Watch, Larry K. Type it in right now if you're listening. Knight Watch, Larry K. Go subscribe. That's where you get most of my content. And I also write for the College Huddle now. No articles yet, but I'm going to be writing a lot through the season. Aaron gave me my first break writing about Rutgers, so I'm still writing some stuff, and I'll be on there. So come check me out.
Well, and usually after my rapid reactions go out, I look for yours too. So
Exactly.
always a pleasure to have you on, and a lot of excitement going into this year. Thanks for help breaking it all down. And thank you for listening and watching once again here at the Scarlet Faithful podcast.